this computer, but I still have people joining. So one sec, Danielle. Okay. I think we're good, but we are at 53 participants. This is fantastic. So I will go ahead and turn the floor over to you, Danielle, and I will continue to admit people as they come in.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for attending today. I will, again, invite you to reach out at the end of the presentation, but I really want to emphasize that if you do have a question after today, please don't hesitate to email me. I'm always happy to get on a Zoom or a Google Meet call to help you work through getting your session set up with Google Forms if it's something you want to try out and maybe incorporate into your IELTS session. So again, please do not hesitate to send me an email if you have any questions, even if you want to just practice it. So with that, I'll tell you a little bit about why I chose to use Google Forms, how that came about, and how it's transitioned during the move to online learning during the pandemic. So it all began actually pre-pandemic with wanting to create a more paper-free classroom. It was something I wanted to do because I had a lot of situations, I'm sure many can relate, where I would create these beautiful paper handouts with step-by-step instructions, and then students would just leave them behind. So I started using LibGuides at my last institution, where I would create a semester instruction guide, and there would be a tab for every class. And that was great because I could share all my materials that way, and the instructor could put it in Blackboard. But unfortunately, when I moved to my new institution, I did not have access to LibGuides. So I kind of had to rethink how I was going to get that information into students' hands. So I created a paper handout, which has a link to the electronic version of the handout. And this electronic version has the direct links to the recommended databases, a copy of the presentation, and a link to the activity that I do in Google Forms. In the example folder that I've shared with you at the top of the presentation, you can find this handout example. So if you want to take a look at it, this is what I hand out in face-to-face classes so students can access the digital version of the handout, and then they can just go to the links during class to check out the presentation and the activities. So it's not as fancy as LibGuides, but it gets the job done. Now, aside from just the wastefulness of paper handouts, I also switched to Google Forms for two key reasons. And this was pre-pandemic. I did it because of accountability, and I did it because of limitations with giving feedback with paper handouts. So one of the big problems with paper handouts is that they feel disposable. Some students would answer one or two questions, get bored, and then just not complete the activity. And I didn't have much control over that. And shockingly, on more occasions than I really care to admit, I did catch students just making up answers. Like they would be at the terminal looking like they were diligently looking up and transcribing the information for an article. And when I actually came around to their station, they were on the web or looking at Facebook. So I knew that I needed something that would help me create an environment in which students could not fake their engagement with the hands-on searching activity, because it's really important for their assignment. On the flip side, I also had students who put a tremendous amount of effort into each and every question in the paper handouts. And in a lot of cases, it was difficult to give them feedback for two reasons. First, sometimes it's just difficult to read their handwriting and you can't quite see what their answers are. So I couldn't fully respond to them. And second, paper handouts are limited to just basic self-reporting. They let the students tell you what they found, and they could give you a little information about how they found it. But the problem with this is that, one, you can't actually examine the source that they found to determine if it meets the requirements of the exercise, which theoretically should be aligned with the requirements of the major research assignment. And two, you can't see the student's process. You can't see how they arrived at that source. So did they actually use their limiters and keywords in a strategic manner, or did they just do a basic search, get lucky, and find something relevant in a sea of mostly irrelevant results? So this was a really important problem that I felt I needed to address in my activities, because without knowing their process and without being able to see what they were finding, I really couldn't give them specific feedback about how to improve their search and selection processes. So enter Google Forms. Now I have to be completely honest, I really can't remember how long I've been using it, but I would say I started using Google Forms probably 5 or 6 years ago in my instruction classes. And since then, the functionality has just so greatly increased. It has really just gotten better and better. Um, I do want to make it really clear that my institution provides access to G Suite. So it is an improved organizational and instructional tool. If your institution does not have G Suite, you may want to consult with your instructional design department or distance learning department before using it to collect student work. Now, I'm not a lawyer and I am not providing legal advice, but I do think it's a good idea to consult with these departments before you start incorporating Google Forms, just to make sure that there are no legal issues with using this tool if your organization doesn't specifically sanction the use of or provide access to G Suite tools. So it's just better to be safe than sorry. Now, before we get into deploying and designing your form, I want to take a minute to actually show you two of the Google Forms that I use. They're each a little bit different, but as you'll see as we go through them, I really try to use the features of the form to engage students by anticipating and addressing points of disengagement. So what I want them to be able to do when they tackle this activity is to be able to spend more time searching, selecting, and thinking about these processes rather than stressing about how to find a particular resource or how to give me the thing that I'm asking them for so that I can see their process or their selection. So we'll just take a quick look at Business 390. And as I mentioned before, you have access to this form in the little Google folder I am sharing with you. So almost like a little Google Forms care package, you'll be able to have this and look at this later. So in this form, this is a class on the future of work. So they're looking at the growth of different industries. I start out with the title. I'm going to tell you why I name it this way in just a little bit. I use the description to tell them why they're doing the exercise, and I provide a link to the presentation if it's available online. I always try to create a presentation where if it's not a recorded presentation, then at least all the slides are available. So this way they can go through it while they're going through the exercise. So they can't say, I don't remember how to do this. I can't do this exercise. It's like, here's the presentation. Just take a quick minute to review it, and then you can continue with the exercise. I do collect email addresses. I know people have feelings about this. The reason I do this is because it enables a response receipt, which means that the student will get a copy of everything that they enter into this form delivered to their email address, which is very convenient because it cuts down on them emailing me to ask me what they submitted because now they can't remember what they found in terms of that great article or that great search they created for their particular topic. So this sends them everything they input into the form. You have a variety of different choices. I just put multiple choice options because these are the different areas that the class focuses on. So they can choose what they'd like to focus on for this activity. I ask them their name. This is a big part of accountability. When they put their name on there, you know, they own this exercise. It's going to be submitted. I'm going to see whether they entered it. Their teacher is going to see whether they entered it. So making them include their name, I feel, increases a sense of ownership of the activity. And then of course I have different sections. So this is an example of a form where I use GIFs. And so I'm using them just to show the student the process of giving me what I am asking them for. My whole emphasis is I don't want them spending or agonizing time or agonizing over the data entry part of the exercise. So I use the GIFs either to illustrate a particular point I'm trying to make with that question or to show them exactly what I want them to give me so that there's no time spent on, you know, wondering, well, how do I give you the answer? I also use description fields. So here we have the name of the database that they're going to be working for this exercise. I use the description fields to give them a direct link to the database. So again, I don't want them, you know, we have limited time. That's the nature of the one shot. I don't want them spending time necessarily trying to figure out how to navigate to the database. I really want to make sure that once they're in there, they know what to do. I can always send them the link to the correct database, but I need to know that they're able to find what they need to find for the assignment once they're in the database. And so again, I include GIF For this particular instructor, it was really important to them that they know how to generate the citation so that they could go back and fix it and clean it up using the style guide. So again, I just included a little GIF that shows them exactly what they need to do to generate that citation and then pop it into the answer field. Again, you can go back to this form at any time. It is in the folder that I am sharing with you. There's also the RAM 201. This stands for Research Aligned Mentorship. This is a program where students get paired with instructors to conduct research. And the 201 class is focused on basically research prep. So things like understanding the difference between scholarly and popular articles, how to use the databases, and so on. So in this case, I've used a couple of different elements, again, to head off disengagement. I shared the presentation with the class in the previous form. In this one, I actually embedded the entire presentation right into the exercise. So again, they can't say, I don't remember how to do this. They can play it right inside the exercise because I've embedded the recorded version of the session here. Again, I collect the email addresses so that they have a copy of their responses. So they have the ability to hang on to their work after the class. And again, very similar. Each question, again, I try to think about how I can head off disengagement before it happens. So we all have that case where students come to class and they don't necessarily have a topic picked out. No problem. That doesn't mean you can't do the exercise. You're just going to take a minute, head over to this database that'll give you a nice list of topics, pick one to work with for the exercise, then come back to the exercise. And I've also included some images as well, again, just to show them what they're going to give me in order to answer the question. So again, you have the ability to check out these forms more in depth a little bit later. So a little bit about how to actually deploy these during classes. As I mentioned, I started this as a pre-pandemic exercise in face-to-face classes. So just to give you an idea of how this fits into the workflow, in the face-to-face class, students get that paper handout, and then they navigate to the electronic version of the handout, and they keep that up on their computer, either at the station or their personal device for the entire class. When I'm done giving them their presentation on the things they're going to be looking at today and the things they're going to be tackling in the activity, they then access the activity from that electronic handout. As they're working on the activities, I walk around, I ask students about their topic. I ask them to tell me, okay, how's it going? What are you doing? How are you searching? And I assist them. And as the answers start coming in, I go up to the front of the class and I share the spreadsheet where the answers are deposited on our projector so everybody can see them. And as they come in, I click open those searches, I click open those article selections, and I demonstrate specifically what they can do to improve their searches, or, you know, if they've selected an article that's maybe a newspaper article and not a scholarly article, which they need for the assignment, I show them, here's how you know what kind of a resource it is. I do not display the students' names as I go through this, and I'll show you 2 ways where you can avoid showing it even though you're collecting that information. But I'm able to give them personalized feedback without actually naming them. And then when class is over, I add the instructor to the spreadsheet and they have access to all the materials. Essentially, the online class functions exactly the same. The only difference is I pop the links in directly to the chat when we start class instead of giving them a paper handout, of course. And the added benefit of doing this in an online environment is that I'm not only demoing the searches, I can then grab the permalink and pop it in the chat and say, okay, whoever's working on this topic, here's a little gift for you. Here is your new and improved search for this topic. Try working with this for your topic. And students have loved it. When I get feedback, that is the #1 thing they love. Even if I don't go over their particular topic, a number of students have commented that it was so helpful to see how I went through their classmates' topics and how I translated what they were working on to how they could create a more efficient, more targeted search. As I mentioned before, this folder that I shared with you, I have a bunch of templates in there. You can see the forms. I just want to bring your attention to one thing. So unlike Google Docs, where you can download a view-only version of the doc, I couldn't enable the ability to download the form so that you could customize it without making everyone an editor. And I didn't want anybody to accidentally be able to change up the questions or delete anything. So right now, if you want a copy of this form that you can customize, this template, all you need to do is click into this folder, go to the one that's labeled request editing, and I will send you a copy. And what will happen is it'll trigger an email when you request editing access from the form, and I will just send you your own copy so that you have a fully formatted version of the basic exercise that I do in Google Forms. This way, all you have to do is drag and drop and change the descriptions and you're good to go. So if you want a copy, just remember to request access. I will send that to you. So when you're getting started with your Google Forms, first thing I recommend is just making sure you organize everything, because as you start generating forms, it's hard to keep track of them. And the way that I do it is I start with a master instruction folder. I create an academic folder for each academic year. And then I create a folder in each of these academic years for the semesters in which I end up teaching. Your semesters may be different. You might be on a trimester schedule. You might be doing a cycle or a concurrent session model. Whatever works for you, just make sure you are able to find them quickly when you need them in the way that makes sense for you. So once you are actually in your folder for the semester that you're creating your forms for, you just right click, you will get the option to create a form, and then you'll be able to create a blank form. So I am going to go through this because I don't want to assume that everybody knows how to use Google Forms. If you do, great. This is a refresher, but I want to go through it step by step in case there are attendees today who are not familiar with Google Forms, or if you haven't used it in a while, it changes quite frequently. So this is the latest in creating and getting your form set up. So once you create a blank form, I suggest, again, having a naming scheme that makes sense to you and helps you find your classes quickly. I just helped an instructor who created a semester's worth of Google Forms and just labeled them homework. So really be specific in your titling. And you can see this is my past life as an archivist coming up. But I like to put the course abbreviation number, the instructor's last name, the date, and the time of class as part of the title. And it seems like a lot, but I have a lot of instances where I teach the same course during the same day multiple times for the same professor. So I find that this helps me keep everything in order. So just get into the habit of creating a very specific naming scheme so you can find the correct form and you can get it to the correct class. Now, I also recommend, so once you open up your form, make sure that you use the same name for the form file as you do for the form title. So again, when you go to check whether the links are correct, you're not going to be able to see the file name if you're not logged in. So if you pull up that form, you just want to make sure that the file name matches the title of the form where it says untitled form in the question area, just so you can make sure, again, that you're using the right form for the right class. So I also suggest using the description area to tell your students why they're doing the activity. And again, if you have created the presentation in a takeaway format, either slides, a Prezi, whatnot, a video, include it there so that they can go to that if they get tripped up on a particular area or they don't quite remember what they were supposed to do. Or honestly, if they came in late and they missed that part, they can just go over that particular part of it again and then continue with the exercise. You also have your question area, so pretty self-explanatory. This is where you're going to pop in your question. This little image icon, this is important. So if you remember in the forms where we saw the static images and the gifs, this is how I added them into the question. You use this little image icon and you can download from your Google Drive account or you can upload from your computer. And then you have your question drop-down menu. So for the most part, I tend to use paragraph questions, which means students enter their text into the answer area because I'm mostly asking them for explanations. Why did you choose this? Or I'm asking them for a description of their title, or I'm asking them to input permalinks, which sometimes can be rather lengthy. So I always choose paragraphs so I know they have enough space to enter the text that I'm asking them to enter. Sometimes I use file upload. This can be really helpful if you're dealing with a database that doesn't generate permalinks. So I haven't used Privco in a while, but last time I used Privco at my last institution where I had access, they didn't generate permalinks to the reports. So when I worked with the graduate students in business, what I would have them do is find a report in their industry, and then I'd have them upload it so I could see they found a report from Privco. So that's just a workaround that you might want to utilize. Now, creating and customizing the form. So again, like I said, I don't want to assume that everybody knows the full functionality of Google Forms. So we're just going to go over some of the key areas on the vertical menu. The plus sign lets you add another question box. The little paper with the arrow lets you import a question. This is a cool feature. I don't use it very much, but the benefit of this is if you're working with an entire department and let's say you want to have a master question bank for all your sessions, if you're all sharing that form, you can then pull in preset questions. So it could be quite a time saver. The add title area lets you add a section of your form that gives you a title and description. So much like the very top of this form where we see untitled form and form description, you can add additional boxes that have a title and description. This is a good way to break up a lot of information on the same page. You'll see that I did that in the business form. So it just creates a visual division of the information. You can add images to the form, so it'll add it in a separate box, not as part of the question, but as a separate box. You can add YouTube videos, which is an example you'll see in the RAM form. I did that right at the top of the form so that students could watch that presentation again if they needed a refresher. And then you have the Add New Section button. That's the little equal sign. So the major difference between adding titles and adding a new section is that the titles help you break up information visually on the same page. If you add a new section, what that means is there will be multiple pages to the form. So everything above that section break will be on one page, and then everything after that new section will be on another page. So basically a student will have to keep clicking next to get to the next set of questions. I don't use that very often unless I'm doing a branching scenario, but that is a whole other presentation in and of itself. You also have your duplicate question button, so you can make a copy of the question and then reformat it. The little garbage pail lets you delete the question if you don't like it. And then there is the required question button. Again, this is something people have a lot of feelings about. I always enable it because it's easy to skip a question. And in the event that you get to, you have a time crunch in class and maybe there's a couple of students who just can't complete all the questions, just tell them to enter nonsense text into the paragraph fields and they'll be able to submit. But I like to enable it so this way students don't skip over any questions. Then you have the more options area. It's the little ellipsis or the hamburger button. What this does is it gives you an option to add a description to your question. Again, there is the go to section based on answer area. That is going to let you do a branching scenario. You can do an escape room type of activity with that. Again, that is a whole presentation in and of itself. If you have questions, definitely email me. But one of the most helpful tools is just adding that additional description. So what I do is, again, I use this either to clarify the question or to provide access to a link to the thing I'm asking students to explore. This way it cuts down on friction. They're able to get into the resource that they need without spending too much time trying to find it. So formulating questions. So when you're formulating questions, you want to keep the following in mind: focus, support, and reflection. So focus on what's most important for students to be able to do by the end of the session, but keep it brief because, again, one-shot sessions don't allow you to do a whole lot. Again, it's just the nature of the session. I try to put in no more than 6 tasks, aside from things like what is your name, what's your email. I think 3 to 4 is ideal. And generally in my classes, it's most important that students be able to construct an effective search, use their limiters, and choose a source that's going to meet the requirements of the assignment. For some classes, like the RAM class, the form that you just saw, you'll see it in the share folder. It's really important to our instructors that students not just understand what a scholarly article is, but how it is distinguished from popular sources and trade sources. So I've included that as one of the questions we asked. Next, you want to consider how you can best support your students so that they engage at an optimal level with the exercise. So I utilize question descriptions and videos and images and GIFs to this end. So if it's a priority that a student engage with a particular database to find particular kinds of resources as part of the activity, then I use the description to reduce friction by providing a direct link to the database, and I use the multimedia embed feature to show students how to give me what I'm asking for. Again, I don't want them spending more time on the data entry portion of the exercise. I want them engaging with the actual task, and including these elements cuts down on that friction. So when it comes to adding multimedia, there are a couple of things to be aware of. First, you can embed images and GIFs right into the questions by clicking that little image icon next to the question field. So if you have any questions about that, just go back through the presentation when you access it, and you will be able to see again what you're going to click to add in those images. To create an annotated image like the one that you see in the template that I'm sharing with you, I just created a screenshot and then use Microsoft Paint to add in the annotation, but you can also use products like Snagit from TechSmith, and I believe TechSmith Capture lets you do that as well. I have some links to these programs at the end of the presentation, so you'll be able to take a look at some of these programs. If you want to create a GIF, which is really more of a moving image rather than a video, you can create a really brief video in, let's say, under 30 seconds, using something like Snagit, Screencast-O-Matic, or TechSmith Capture. And then you can convert the resulting MP4 file using a converter. And again, I have some recommendations at the end of this presentation for converters you might want to use. Snagit, again, which is something I use, it has a built-in MP4 to GIF conversion option, but it is a fee-based product, which I do pay for personally. I really like it, but there are some options again at the end of the presentation if that's not something you want to use. If you're going to create video, just be aware that it needs to be something that's living on YouTube before you can pull it into the form. So make sure that you've uploaded your sessions to YouTube somewhere, or you can actually do a search right in the video embed for a video. So it needs to, again, it just needs to be on YouTube first in order to pull it in. Finally, you want to reflect. So where appropriate, build in reflection. To avoid situations where students are just picking and submitting anything that pops up in their search list, make sure to ask them to explain their strategies and their selections. When they have to tell you why they chose something and why it is or isn't appropriate for the assignment, they have to engage in evaluation, and that's win-win no matter what they pick. Now, customizing your settings and finally sharing. So when you've completed all of your questions, you want to click the little cog to adjust your settings before sharing. So what I suggest doing is collecting the email addresses. That's why you see the email addresses collected in the forms that I shared with you. This is because this is what enables the response receipts. So just make sure collect email addresses is clicked, response receipts is clicked, and then always is selected in the menu. And this will enable Google to send each student a copy of their responses. And of course, every once in a while, just remember, students sometimes input their email incorrectly. So they may email you if they didn't get a copy. You will have these in a spreadsheet to be able to go back to and provide the student with that information. If you want to share the fillable form with students and the instructor, then you're just going to click send. From here, you're going to make sure that you click link, the little link icon, It's automatically going to give you a very long link. So I like to just click shorten URL. So it's a little bit more manageable. And then you can just copy and share this with students. Just pop it in the chat when you're ready to do the activity. Or again, you could pop it on a LibGuide. Now, viewing responses. If you leave the form alone, all of your question answers will come up and populate in the tab that's labeled responses, and you'll have an option to view them individually or in aggregate. But I find it helpful to review the answers, not only for myself, but when I'm displaying them in front of the class in a spreadsheet. And to do this, what you need to do is click that little green tab once you're in the response section of the form. And this little green button right here will let you create a spreadsheet. So I will say there is a way to create one workbook for, let's say, the entire semester and have each set of answers be a page in a single workbook, but that's kind of an advanced tactic. If you have questions about that, please email me. I'm not going to demo that today because we're just going over the basics, but just be aware it is a possibility. You can do that. So if you want it even more organized in one workbook, you can do that. But we're just going to create an individual spreadsheet for this particular exercise. We're going to click create new spreadsheet and
Danielle, this is Christine. We are at 11:16, just so you know.
Okay, I think I have like 2 more slides left.
Great.
Okay. So you'll see your empty spreadsheet. When responses start coming in, again, you'll view them in aggregate, or you'll be able to view them as individual responses. I don't like looking at them this way because it's harder to hide the student names. So you just, again, click that little green button. It will take you to your spreadsheet. And what you'll be able to do is see all the answers. Now, if you want to hide the student name, all you have to do is use the slider so that that column is not showing, or you can select the column and turn the cell color to the same color as the text, and you won't be able to see the names of the student. So this way, you're not displaying their names, you'll only be showing their work. So what I then do is I click the searches. I'm able to open it up and go through the search and say, hey, you want to make this even more manageable? Make sure you use this limiter. Or, hey, this is your topic. You might want to use this keyword instead of that keyword. And again, I can open up the selection too. I can say, okay, so for your assignment, you're going to need this type of resource, but you've given me this type of resource. Here's how to double check to make sure that you're looking at a resource that meets the requirements for your assignment. And this is where the magic happens. So if you want to share this with the instructor, all you have to do then is click share and they'll have access to the form. What you'll do then is enter their email to share it with them. Now, you may have an instance where an instructor asks you to share it with their personal email. Please be empowered to say no, because you don't know who has access to the non-campus email. I never share it with a non-campus email. And the reason I do that is because, again, I don't know who has access to it. And we're dealing with information that students have input into this form. So if you get that request, feel absolutely free to say, no, I'm going to send it to your campus email. If you want to share it with your personal email, that's up to you, but I am going to do this so I can protect the students' data. So just a couple of final thoughts. Moving to this model has really kept activities from feeling disposable. There's a digital participation trail. There's more of a sense of ownership, and the activity isn't ephemeral. Students can follow up and do follow up with me after the exercise. If there's an event where I don't get to their answer, maybe they answered in the very last minute of class, they will email me because I invite them to email me, and they'll say, I would like you to give me some feedback on this search that I submitted during class. And I do. So that's awesome. Again, the features of the form let me address and anticipate points of disengagement. So if a student might encounter a part where they say, I can't do this because I don't have a topic. No, you can. Here's a resource that will help you do it. Or I didn't see that part of the presentation. I can't do it. No, here's the presentation. You can do it after you review it. And again, just the speed at which it allows me to access information and links that show me the student's process and what they've selected, it means I can give them significant and meaningful personalized feedback, and I can get to more students to give this feedback. So it's been really a game changer for my sessions. And so that was a lot of information. I am happy to take questions. Again, feel free to pop them in the chat. If you would like to email me afterwards, again, please feel free to do that as well. I'm gonna scroll just to see if I missed any questions. And I totally invite our moderators. If you see that I missed a question, please let me know.
It's looking like, Danielle, thank you, first of all, that you've answered some of the ones as you were going along, which is good. I guess I'm curious to hear a little bit more about that conversation you have with the faculty member when you said that you showed us the mechanics of how to share, but what impact has that had with your relationship with those faculty as you're kind of bringing them into how you're giving feedback and you're showing them point by point, what the students have given and how you're kind of, one-upping it a little bit. Talk about that conversation that happens after.
So I started sharing it unasked. I didn't ask them if they wanted it. When I realized I could share the work with them, I automatically started sharing it with the professors. And now it's something that they come to expect. And they really like it because it helps them really see where the student is at the point of the library visit. And they can see just based on the answers, ooh, I really have to sit down with the student and talk about this topic. And make sure that we bring it in line with what I'm asking them to do for the assignment. So they really, really love having access to it. And like I said, I say at the beginning of every class, this is going to be given to your instructor so they could see that the work that you've done. And I feel like that improves the accountability and the effort that's put into it, because I'm not saying it's going to be graded for participation, but it kind of feels like, oh, the professor's going to see this, whereas the paper handouts, they might crumple and throw it in the corner when they leave. But this, they have access to it and they can go back to it. And so I know they've used it to, work with students on their topics, again, to bring them in line with what they're asking for the assignment.
Mm-hmm. I did see that Cecilia asked a question about following up with students if they submit incorrect answers into the forms. So I just want to give you a chance to maybe address how you're following up with students.
So for the most part, I'm able to address almost all the information that they input into the form during class. So I generally do get to everybody. I mean, it's kind of amazing the response rate that I've seen improved with the forms. So generally I just get to it during class, and I don't like to think of it necessarily as correct or incorrect. It's just whether or not it's particularly appropriate for the exercise, which relates to whatever assignment they've been given. So like if they put in, let's say I've asked them for a peer-reviewed article on their topic and they plug in a source that is from the New York Times. What I'll do is I'll go through and I'll say, this is a great, article. It has information on your topic, but it doesn't meet the requirements because XYZ. And here's how you can double check, just in case you're ever unsure of what type of source you're using. Here's how you can check to make sure it's going to meet the requirements of your assignment. So in terms of following up after class, we are working with adults, and I do invite them, if they feel I haven't addressed their responses, to follow up with me after class. But just because of the volume of students we have, I don't reach out to every single student after class. I mostly get to everybody during the session, but I do invite students to follow up after. And that's been the amazing thing about the online session, is that students do follow up with me. Again, if they didn't get a chance to submit it during the class, maybe they finished it 15 minutes after, and it blows my mind that they still worked on it after class. Technically ended, which is just, it's delightful to me. But they'll finish it maybe 15, 20 minutes after class is technically ended, submit it, and then send me an email and go, can you take a look at this and tell me if I'm on the right track? And that's been really a wonderful result. But no, I don't specifically go and seek out students afterwards. I invite them to contact me because, again, we're all adults, and
Gotcha.
it's our responsibility, if you think you need help, to follow up after. But like I said, I mostly am able to get to everybody.
Excellent. Okay, I think we have time for one last question that just came in from Rachel. She's asking, how do you generally break up the session time? Like how much time on presentation, activity, reviewing responses?
I typically try to keep my presentation to, so a typical session, it could be It really ranges. It really depends on the instructor too. Some are like, I have a 3-hour class, but I'm giving you a half hour. So I really have to think about what are the specific needs of the class. A regular session is about 50 minutes. So what I do is I spend generally 20 minutes on the presentation, and then I spend the rest on the activity. With the RAM class, that's a really interesting one. And this is something that's arisen because of the pandemic. We do multiple forms of classes now. So we have asynchronous classes with follow-up Q&A sessions, and then we have synchronous classes, and then we have just recorded classes with no Q&A follow-up. And so we've done the RAM as both asynchronous, basically flipped with a Q&A session, and live. And so I find that either way, I'm still able to fit it in just because of the speed with which they can share that information and I can access it. But I would say, you know, if you really have to think about how much time you have. And I would say I usually do a third on the presentation and then 2/3 for the activity, actually.
Okay. Thank you, Danielle, very much for your presentation. Applause, applause, applause in that chat box. Thank you everyone for coming and asking questions and being part of our online summit this year. It is now time for lunch or a break of some type, depending on where you are in this world. But we will reconvene in about an hour. So it'll be 12:30 Central Time, in which we will go into breakout session 2. So thanks again, everyone, and we'll see you in a little bit.
Thank you so much. Have a great one.
Thank you. Bye-bye. I see people leaving. Just so everyone knows, our next session isn't for another hour yet. So in case you're off by an hour or so, I'm going to close out this room, and we'll see you all in about an hour for breakout session 2.